Hi, this is a lecture for connective tissues, and today I'm going to go over connective tissue proper and the category of tissues found under that. Now, this is the second part, so you should have done the first part, which went over common features found in all connective tissues. So, today we're going to go over the two categories of connective tissue proper, which is dense connective tissues and loose connective tissues. Okay, so to clarify what connective tissue proper means, it's a special category of connective tissues that is flexible and generally speaking is found dispersed throughout the body. It underlies skin, fat, ligaments, and tendons. There's a little bit of flexibility to it, and it's still solid tissue, which makes it connective tissue proper. So the three main kinds are dense regular, dense irregular, elastic, and what's known as dense elastic, or sometimes called elastic tissue. And under loose connective tissues, we're going to go over areolar, adipose, and reticular tissues. All right. So these are the main two subcategories, but you don't have to write this down. It's going to come up in the later tables. I just want to kind of give you a quick preview. Okay. So of our two types of categories of connective tissue proper, we have dense connective tissues, which are connective tissues that are really abundant in fibers. So we have three main types: dense regular, dense irregular, and dense elastic. And if you haven't yet, make sure you kind of get this table down, or some element of this table down, where you have the types, then space to write about the characteristics, space for at least one or two examples, and then space for a little quick sketch. Okay, so dense regular consists of parallel collagen fibers. Remember the thick, big fibers? And they're strong, and some stretch in one direction, and they're lined up so that all these collagen fibers are parallel to one another. You aren't going to see thick lines in the way that you see them in skeletal muscles, but it's similar-ish in the idea. All right, you find the connective tissues for dense regular the most common in ligaments and tendons, things that are stretchy, but only stretch in one direction, right? You can only bend your foot or your leg or whatever joint you have in one direction, but not many. And if you move it a wrong way, you can tear it. So we're going to do the drawings last. The next thing we're going to go over is dense irregular tissue. So dense irregular are when dense tissue, it's dense, so it has a lot of fibers, but the fibers kind of go in many directions. And as a result, it gives it strength, though not as much strength in one direction, but it has strength to fuse in many directions. And it's a little stretchy, but not too stretchy. But it's diffused throughout. So it's a little stretchy, but not too much, and it has some strength, but not as much strength as dense regular. But it's spread in all directions. So your dermis in your skin, which is the layer of your skin underneath the topmost layers, has a lot of dense irregular tissue in it. And because it's in all directions, there's a lot more holes in dense irregular tissue, which gives it opportunity to have more blood flow. And dense elastic is the last type of dense connective tissue. In this case, it's dense with elastic fibers, in addition to collagen, much more elastic fibers than the other two. And this provides it a lot of stretchiness and the ability to return to its original shape. So you find this in thick tissues that have to return to their shape really quickly. So you're going to see a lot of that in the walls of your arteries. The arteries are big blood vessels that push blood through it very quickly, as well as your lungs, which, as you know, your lungs expand and contract really quickly. Lungs also have a different type of muscle in it called smooth muscles, but in addition to that, it needs a lot of dense elastic tissue to give it the ability to sling back to its smaller shape very quickly. So let's draw cartoony versions of these different tissues. So in dense regular, what happens is if you have those collagen fibers that kind of run throughout, and they're parallel to one another, and they're usually pretty densely packed, hence dense. But I mean, they're usually side by side and pretty close together. Now, you're gonna learn about a tissue type called skeletal muscle later on, but it actually doesn't really look like this type under a microscope. The reason why is because you don't see thick, it's much thinner, so you're going to see a lot more bands under dense regular compared to muscle, and you're not going to see striations. Striations are like little subtle stripes, and you can't see that in dense connective at all. Dense regular connective. In addition to that, you're going to occasionally see pockets of cells that look kind of like this, and these are the fibroblasts that help form the fibers like collagen throughout. I'll show you some microscopic slides of this towards the end of the lecture. Dense irregular has collagen fibers that kind of go everywhere. But a big thing about dense irregular is you shouldn't have too many holes, otherwise it would be areolar. So just really fill up the space, but have your collagen fibers wiggle throughout in many directions. It's kind of hard to draw, but you'll get there. Okay, and then in different spaces you should have the fibroblasts there to help form the collagen. Honestly, what it actually looks like under a microscope is just, you look at it and it looks like a hot mess of denseness, kind of going in all kinds of spaces with random pockets everywhere. Alright? So it's not going to even look as neat as this, and this, relative to actual picture, is pretty neat. Yeah, it's still a hot mess, but compared to real life pictures, it's pretty neat. Finally, you have elastic tissue. So in this case, elastic tissue definitely has collagen, so there's a few pockets of collagen, but they're not as tightly packed together like dense regular, but they are in the same direction. But the big thing with dense elastic is you see a lot of the wiggly elastic bands, light elastic bands running everywhere, in addition to the collagen. And then, of course, you have little pockets of the fibroblasts helping to create the fibers that are running throughout. These are really ugly pictures, but that's kind of the underlying idea. You should have wiggly elastic fibers along with thicker collagen fibers and fibroblasts. These are sort of more cartoony versions that help kind of get the same idea across. Alright, but hopefully the images at the end will help really clarify what dense regular and irregular and elastic look like. In fact, actually I'm going to quickly preview it so you kind of see what they look like under a microscope. So this is what dense regular looks like. It's like just waviness, very tightly packed, kind of parallel but wiggly. And the big one here is it will not look like, you're going to think about it later on, skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle is really like thick parallel bundles, while these are wavy and wiggly. That's how you know it's dense regular, because collagen kind of wiggles a little bit. Alright, this is dense irregular. That's what I mean by thick, hot, messy bands kind of running in all kinds of directions. That's kind of hard to tell. But you see kind of random pockets of spaces between them, and that's how you know it's dense irregular. And those little dots, those are the fibroblasts. Sometimes in the dense irregular, you'll see little circles here. Those circles are those glands that are sometimes found inside of dense irregular tissue. That's sometimes found in connective tissue. And finally, this is dense elastic tissue. And in this case, this is not really a sharp view, but you can kind of see those thin, darker bands of elastic fibers running against that background of collagen fibers. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go over the second category of connective tissue proper, called loose connective tissue. The format for the slide got a little wonky on my application, but loose connective tissue is the most abundant form of connective tissue. It really is a sticky foundation found throughout your body. Alright, so we have three main types called areolar, adipose, and reticular. Reticular, areolar, and adipose, I would say, is the most common tissues found in your body, because they really are found especially underneath your skin in large amounts. All right, so let's go over it. So areolar is a loose and spaced out type of connective tissue. It's got pretty much every type of fiber and cell in it, and it makes and releases kind of a gel-like ground substance that helps it stick and attach and hold on to tissues. It's the thin film tissue that I showed you in the earlier pictures of membranes in the cavities and stuff like that. That's actually areolar tissue. Any kind of sticky, filmy tissue you find on the covering of organs on the edges of cavities, that's generally speaking areolar. So it definitely forms the basement membrane, and it's found around vessels, it's found between muscles. If you ever ate chicken or meat at all and you peel it apart and sometimes you see a thin film holding the pieces of meat together, that's areolar tissue. Now, adipose is made of adipocytes, and adipocytes are the fat cells, right? So adipose just is tissue with lots and lots of adipocytes, lots and lots of fat containing cells. And as a result, because these cells are so dense with adipocytes, you end up having lots of fat there, and that fat will both store energy as well as provide cushioning and insulation for that body part. So body fat, obviously, is a big section, is where adipose tissue is found. Body fat under your skin, body fat on your organs. A lot of the organs have body fat on it, like your brain and your heart, etc. Last but not least, we're going to go over reticular. Reticular is kind of similar to areolar in that it releases a gel-like ground substance. But the big thing here is it's far more abundant in reticular fibers than any other organ. And that reticular fiber is kind of like a spider web network that allows a lot of cells to kind of sit there and hold in place and form organs. But it's a very soft and squishy organ that forms because there's no tight outer layer. So pretty much any organ that is very mushy has lots of reticular tissue. Liver, when it's uncooked, is very mushy. That's got a lot of reticular tissue. Spleen has a lot of reticular tissue, etc. So spleen, liver, lymph nodes. Lymph nodes are special pockets that help screen white blood cells, but all of them have a lot of reticular tissue. So what I'm going to do is do kind of like a cartoony drawing of those different things. So areolar is kind of like dense irregular in that there's collagen fibers, but they're much more openly spaced out than what they were in the dense tissue pictures. So you only need a few of collagen fibers. You want a few elastic fibers kind of striping across, and then you want a few cells poking their way through. And that's it. Now I'm going to sketch adipose. Now, one of the interesting things with adipose is, generally speaking, when you color it in, it's a cell, kind of a thin layer of cell on the edge with a little pocket with a nucleus, and in the very inside of that cell is an empty lake. And what's happening inside that empty lake is its fat is just not stained very well, because it's really hard for dye to penetrate into the center. By the way, I didn't mention it earlier, but all these pictures of tissues are not the real color of the tissue. They're stained for visibility, so they're clearer. Okay? Real tissue just looks pale and gray and not easily separated from other tissue. But there's special stains that you can use to make different tissue types clearer than others. Because fat doesn't absorb dye really easily, it tends to look like a pale circular center in the middle of the cell. Okay, so adipose tend to be kind of side by side all the time. And that's kind of just how you draw it. It just draws a lot of chubby little cells side by side. And then what you should do is make sure you have a fat nuclei squished off to the edge. And there you go, adipose. All right, finally we have, and there are collagen fibers there, and they're woven, and they're not very easily visible, but they're kind of woven through and between the adipose cells if there's collagen fibers in them. Okay, but you don't usually see the collagen fibers very easily because they're so squished between the cells. All right, last one is reticular. So reticular has a lot of reticular fibers. Remember, reticular fibers are very hard to see, and when you do stain them to make them visible, they get very dark. So basically, it's got that, again, it looks like cracked glass under a microscope. So you just kind of have a lot of cracks running everywhere. That's the reticular fibers when they're stained with a special stain that makes it kind of black or silver. And then you typically find a lot of spots within the cracked glass. Depends on what you're using to stain, that those spots might even look black too. They might look blue, they might look pink, but they're going to be in between all the cracks. Okay? And those are like kind of cells that form the organ that are just kind of held in place. Here are some cartoony drawings of these different tissue types, but I think they're more accurately seen in the histological pictures of them. And these are the classic histology pictures of areolar, where you can see the collagen and elastic fibers, the adipose tissue, where you can see the lakes of fat, and the reticular, where you can see the cracked glass appearance of reticular fibers, and all the cells that are kind of like held between all those cracked glass pieces. Okay, here's some more histological examples of these tissues. So here's another example of areolar. This is a real picture over here of areolar tissues. Sometimes other cells like adipose can be found within them, but it's really that collagen fiber loose network that makes it areolar. So if you notice, dense irregular is just also random areolar or random collagen fibers, but because they're so dense, you never see a clear fiber. While here on the areolar connective tissue, you can really see that fiber streak across the slide. Right? These are other pictures of areolar tissue. Here's a kind of cartoon version of areolar tissue. Here's a electron microscope, but it's really this image that's the one you would see under a microscope. Adipose, again, this is another image of adipose. Really, when you see those fat lakes, those circular clear lakes, and lots of them, that's how you know it's adipose. Other examples, and again, that squished to the corner dot, that's actually the nuclei in that cell that got kind of pushed to the side because of all the fat inside the cell. Again, reticular just looks like cracked glass. And here's some other images of reticular based on different slides, but ultimately the fiber really has that cracked glass appearance and is always stained very dark due to the stain needed to see them. All right, takeaways. Connective tissue proper is needed to allow the attachment and protection of organs and other major body tissues. They are generally solid tissues with a decent amount of elasticity for many fibers, or they have adipose cells found in them that allows them to be pretty elastic to a degree. Dense connective tissue contains abundant and tightly woven fibers that provide lots of strength but minimal space for fluids and other things to move through them. The exception in this case, though, is dense irregular. Because it's irregular, there's enough cracks inside of it that allows spaces for things to weave in, like glands, like blood vessels, like nerves. Loose connective tissue, though, because it's loose and there's a lot of space in them, they are the ones that provide the most space for cells and blood vessels and other stuff to weave through that tissue and hold things in place to help nourish other tissues nearby, like epithelial tissues nearby. That concludes the lesson. Move on to any other work you have for the day. Bye.